Basically, today we have a phenomenal guest, Shane. And just to kind of get into this, you were actually first introduced to me by another grower. We just recently started a grow journal with him, because he's a first-time grower, and his first yield, he was yielding 180 grams per plant, jumped to 190, just switched to a better LED, implementing a lot of your techniques, and he just yielded over a half pound per plant. And so when you kind of use 5 by 5 square feet of space, using that over the years, it's been predominantly the square footage for 1,000 square or 1,000 watt light, because it covers that amount of space roughly. The 3 pound per light has really been the notorious goal to hit. And really, he introduced me to you. And then from there, I saw you on Mr. Grow It, and I was just like, you know what, we really got to get into you, because there's, I think, a lot of efficiencies that still need to be done if people want to go into indoor growing and be competitive in the marketplace. So Dave, do you have any questions, or any of you guys have any questions to start off with? Or even, will you introduce yourself, Shane, please?
If you haven't checked out our monthly membership, I highly recommend to do so. For only $2.99, you get access to over 1,570 photos, 162 videos, 10 files, 15 audio files, 562 shared links, and 86 members willing and ready to assist you through your growing practice. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and remember to have a great grow. Make sure to hit the join button on the bottom of every video.
So yeah, my name is Shane. I'm from MIGRO. I run a company that manufacture and sell lights, LED lighting. Been running for about 5 years now, and also run a YouTube channel called MIGRO and Instagram page with the same name. And yeah, we review lights. I do a lot of videos and instructional stuff on how to optimize your setup. Whether it be just simply getting the hanging height correct, or the right wattage for your grow to maximize the yield from your space. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff on there. So it's MIGRO on YouTube, and the website has a lot of blogs to www.migrolight.com. And yeah, as I said, solely focused on everything LED lighting at the moment.
Excellent. And we can see you have 13.2 million views, 235 videos. That's a lot of testing of lights, and just over 74.5 subscribers. And we thank you for your dedication. Like, there's a lot of people out there that do, in-home testings and videos, but you really took the reins on this one. And I think majority of the community is going to come to you when they're searching what light they want to buy, and looking forward to your views, because you have a very thoughtful process. You have very controlled method. So there's a lot of variables that can alter the test. But if anyone has watched your videos, you see you're very methodical with your process is very consistent, and that's what the community needs, especially now with LED lights. I mean, geez, every day it seems like a new company's on the market, the new biggest thing, or why their light is better. And we need competent people like yourself to really dive deep into these and compare the numbers that the manufacturers are giving, see if there is any differences, why there's differences. So I know the community thanks you, Shane. Thank you.
I appreciate it.
I hate to even ask this question, because backgrounds actually don't really matter to me at all. But how did you get started in lighting? Like, where did that original passion come from?
Yeah, so I'm a manufacturing engineer by qualification, but then went into various different stints in engineering. So worked in wastewater treatment, worked in lifts and escalators and construction, lots of different jobs, mainly kind of corporate stuff. And about 6-7 years ago, just sort of was losing the will to live in the corporate environment, and it came an opportunity really to take a package, to take some redundancy from the place that I was working in. And it's sort of my lifelong dream, really, to start my own company and do something myself. I've been a grower for a long time, maybe 20 years. And so I had a lot of experience in that area. Just before that moment in time, I'd been experimenting myself with getting into LEDs, and was having a very frustrating experience with, buying what was promised to be, much better than HBS, and which is what I was using at the time. Actually, CMH I was using at the time, and found it to be unsatisfactory, had real problems with it. So ended up spending, at the time, quite a lot of money on sensor technology to try and figure out what I was doing. And I'd made a bit of investment at that. And just those sort of things coalesced and came in at the same time. And so I just decided to have a go and see about making them myself. And yeah, started up the company. That was 2015. So yeah, just over 6 years ago now. And
Wow.
yeah, and I have a background as well. My mother is a horticulturalist, so is my wife. And so I've grown up around, gardening and planting and greenhouses and all that stuff as well. I kind of like the combination of the two things, the sort of highly technical, controllable lighting and engineering, and the terribly frustrating random world of horticulture where, you're never learned anything. You're never certain what you're doing. There's always a bit of art rather than science in it. And I kind of like those two things coming together. It kind of makes it fun.
Well, just like Dave said, I really do think the work you're doing with lighting is going to improve the knowledge that's out there on, like, comparing it to what the physics, the college grads are getting, and all these other horticulturals are getting. And, it makes me also wonder, how much did they even do their own research versus just reading a book and resharing the information? So and it's also like what we're doing with Jason right here. He just, again, passed that notorious 3 pounds per light plan on his most recent grow on square footage real estate wise. And I think it's going by a lot by some of your suggestions on adjusting the lights and one tweak at a time, and kind of refollowing up with your research and validating it again. So I'm looking forward to this.
I have to say now, things have changed a lot since I started, because when I started, it was sort of the start of the blurple lights, and there was a lot of questionable science going on around the selling of blurple lights, and it's created a lot of confusion. To be quite honest, they were lying really about the performance of the fixtures that they were selling in order to try and bump up their effectiveness to sell more of them.
You said purple lights? Purple lights, you said?
The red and blue, the blurple lights, yeah.
The blurple lights, gotcha.
Yeah, shorthand for the early LED fixtures, which when they first came out were not any better than HID. In fact, a lot of them were worse, and still are worse than a good CMH or even HPS setup. And, so things like a power map, for example, even something as simple as that, they used to manipulate them where they'd have this, I don't know if you remember them, but they'd have the cross sort of version, which would have lots of measurements in the center where LEDs are quite intense. And then they'd have these, a few little scattered measurements around the periphery, which is just as important as the center, because you can get just as much productivity out of the edges of your grow as you can from the dead center. So there was a lot of questionable marketing and questionable science around at the time. And I was trying to sell what were realistically expensive lights. They were high performance lights. They were well engineered. They did what they promised they would do, but they were expensive. I had to try and figure out a way to sell them, or at least to show the benefit of high efficiency and spending a lot more on them. And so came up with this idea of comparing the cheaper stuff, basically, that was out on the market, that was lower performance, against my own lights, and just started from there, really.
Exactly what you said, and we're going to start with this, but exactly what you said is exactly what I observed. I got out of really the indoor growing scene around 2013, went to outdoor because it was just 9-day difference in yield, then got out of it altogether, went into the hemp side. And so my opinion of the LEDs was really at that 2013, which what I was observing too, is like, I don't really think these LEDs are better, more efficient, but I don't think it's really worth it. And at this point, I've really had to change my opinion, watching, once again, going back into grow coaching again and observing a lot of grows under LEDs. I'm like, wow, that is amazing. That's amazing. So Dave, what's the first question?
So if you can dive in for our viewers, understanding the lighting specifications. So, entry levels, or even, more experienced growers are getting into LEDs, understanding all the specifications. So PPE, PAR, DLI. Do they need to focus on if they have Samsung diodes? Do they need to focus if it's a mean well driver? Like, can you help our viewers understand, like if you're just getting into LEDs, kind of building from building a good foundation up to that light? Can you dive into that?
And also, Ken and Jason, you got any questions, just raise your hand and then go and jump in, because I'm just going to sit back and listen, because you guys really have a lot more knowledge than I do on this.
Yeah, so I suppose to start off with spectrum, I think is the most important place to start, because it's the one which is least understood and most opportunity for confusion and, marketing to get in there and sort of stir things up a little bit as well. So plants, in order for plants to grow, they need photons of light, which are little packets of energy that travel in the light. And there's about 8 of those photons are used to in a chemical reaction within the plant, photosynthesis. About 8 of those photons are used up to create 1 unit of glucose or sugars in order to help the plant grow. And generally, the plant doesn't care what sort of fixture those photons are coming from. It doesn't know nor care if it's coming from the sun, if it's coming from a HPS light, a ceramic metal halide light, or an LED light. There are aspects to spectrum which will vary the shape of the plant and some other characteristics, but they don't have a huge effect. They're marginal effects, or they'll have a degree of effect. So, for example, plants will respond to the proportion of blue in a light spectrum quite strongly. I'll get to that in a minute. But to other aspects like the amount of green or red, or as I said, what fixture or the color temperature, they generally don't it doesn't mean anything to them. It doesn't affect their growth. So in terms of spectrum, modern light fixtures, so I guess most people now are buying LED light fixtures, and most of those LED light fixtures, the bulk of the light that's being generated, or the photons that are being generated, are coming from the white LEDs in the fixture. And those white LEDs, the reason it's white is because it's got a mixture of all the colors. So when you mix the blue, the green, and the orange and the red together, it generates white light. That light will be more orangey or a warm color, like the light I have here in this room, if it has a low proportion of blue compared to the red and the green. And it will have a cooler white or a more sort of blue tint to it if it has a higher proportion of blue. But most LEDs, even the warmer white ones, will have about 7 or 8% blue in it. And any fixture with more than sort of 3-4% blue, that is sufficient blue to affect the plant growth, that it will be dense and short, which is what we want when we're growing indoors. We don't want big stretchy plants, leggy plants taking up our whole tent. We want them short and compact and dense. That used to be an issue when we used HID, because HPS has only 2 or 3% blue, and so we would get quite a lot of stretching when we were using HPS in the flowering stage. But really, for LED fixtures, almost every light I've tested in the last 3 or 4 years, LED light with white as the base, has been a suitable spectrum to grow anything you want at any stage you want. And you can play around with the spectrum a little bit to get marginal differences in terms of the characteristics of the plant, but it'll only be marginal in small degrees. At the edges of the spectrum, so the power spectrum, which is the same as the visible spectrum, as I said, going from blue up to red, there are photons or light generated at the extremities or outside the extremities of that. On the one end is UV. So deep blue goes into UVA. UVA doesn't really affect plant growth much more than blue does. So again, more of it will generate shorter growth. However, down in UVB, it does have a slightly different effect on plant growth. So you can stimulate the plant to generate more oils, not potency in terms of medicinal herbs, but more oils. So better flavor and odor, smell, by using UVB in the flowering stage. That has proven to be useful. On the other end, we've got far red, which is basically just past red. It's barely visible. It's a very deep red. It's not infrared, which is generated by heat, but far red is up to about 750 nanometers. So it's on that extremity. There is a belief that far red has a property where it enhances the the rate or the level of photosynthesis generated by the rest of the photons. I don't believe that to be true. It's a bit of bro science, I think, going on at the moment, and misinterpretation of actual science. However, far red will cause stretching. So people do add it into their spectrum. I don't think it's the wisest thing to do, because it's not as photosynthetically efficient as within the power spectrum, and it can cause stretching. So I don't really see the point of including it. But as I said, there's marketing forces at play here, where the way I describe it is, if you remember the stereos that came out in the 80s and the 90s, which had all the flashing dials and all these indicators on the equalizers and all that stuff, none of them made it sound any better. They're just sort of whiz bang trinkets to give you the impression that this was a more sophisticated piece of equipment than it actually is. And that's my personal opinion on these additional UVA and far red LEDs. They're just dressing. Really what you want is lots of photons, lots of white photons. The more photons, the better. So that's with regard to spectrum.
So
for most growers, you don't need to worry about it.
Can I ask you a question? I have a map, a graph. I'm sorry. On the lower hand, right hand corner. Is full spectrum? Can full spectrum be without infrared and any sort of UV?
Yes.
So from 400, in my mind, from 400 to 700, the visible spectrum to me is full spectrum. But a lot of people throughout the communities feel if your light doesn't have IR or some type of UV diode, that it's not full spectrum. But in my mind, I'm like, well, each wave from the left to the right, there's way more spectrums. There's microwaves, there's radio waves. I mean, gamma rays. So, but why did we stop it at infrared and UV? Is full spectrum between that 400 to 700?
It is. So full spectrum, you do not need, as I said, to go down into the UVA region or up into the far red region in order to generate healthy growth with good productivity or good efficiency. The graph that you're referring to is called the McCree curve, and it was generated in the 1970s in a lab where bits of plant were chopped up and put into containers, and specific wavelengths of light, narrow band wavelengths of light, were beamed into that solution, and they measured the amount of gases produced, and they determined the rate of photosynthesis generated by samples in a jar. We don't grow plants in a jar. We grow them in an environment where there's lots of different things going on, and the argument, for example, that if you look at that graph, that green is less photosynthetically efficient than red. In lots of other live experiments, where they're whole plant experiments, they have proven that also to be the case. But they've also found that, well, there's a simple benefit to having green, for example. If you've ever worked with the blurple LED, as in just the blue and the red, you can't see green. You can't actually see the health of your plant. You can't see the condition of the leaves. It's not a good way to garden if you can't see what's going on in your garden. So, the addition of green is more of a benefit just to filling out the spectrum and making it look good. It helps us do our work. It helps us inspect our plants and see them. And then also it has other properties. So, for example, green actually, the wavelength of green actually penetrates a little bit deeper into the leaf, and it causes photosynthesis a little bit deeper than red or blue would. And so it utilizes more of the plant in terms of photosynthesis, and the whole system becomes more efficient. But I've had, I would defer to others in terms of their experience and their knowledge in this area. And I've had two experts, two professors of biology and basically light science on the channel for long discussions, and I've read papers by them, and they all say the same thing. Your plants will grow under any photons. They like all photons. If you have if you were to design a spectrum from scratch, and you had free reign, you would pretty much design the spectrum that comes from a white LED at the moment. It's matching exactly what we want pretty much in terms of the output. So white LEDs, particularly warmer white. Sorry, Ken, go ahead, yeah.
Yes, I'd like to ask a question about these white diodes. How many wavelengths or bands do they emit?
So a white diode is actually a blue diode with a phosphorus coating, and the blue photons pass through the phosphorus coating, and there's like a diffraction occurs, and it basically bounces around. It generates energy in the phosphorus, which generates light from that. Mm-hmm. And so of all wavelengths between 400 and 700 nanometers. And if you see the spectrum curve for a blue or white diode, you will see that spike of blue, which is that peak on the blue is the actual peak of the LED, the blue LED underneath that phosphorus. And then depending on the depth of phosphorus, there will be a slightly different ratio of blue to green and red. So warmer white will have more phosphorus, which is converting more of the blue wavelengths into other ones, into the green and red. And with a lower amount of phosphorus, it'll be more blue dominant or cooler white. But again, anything really in the color temperature range that's available on the market, so from about 2000 Kelvin color temperature up to about 6000, all of them are suitable for growing. There is an argument that the warmer white will be a little bit more photosynthetically efficient because red photons will generate a little bit more photosynthesis than blue ones, but it's a small difference between them. It's a small gap between them. Certainly less than what's indicated in the McCree curve. Probably only about 10% difference. Yes, Mark.
I got two questions. First one was you said it was. I never knew that LED had phosphorus in it. So, and I know
that's the yellow that you see on the top is a phosphorus coating.
So they make MH high pressure sodium and metal halide also using phosphorus gas. So are they basically
all the same tech?
All the same tech, just more efficient.
Fluorescents are the same. Fluorescents use a base of mercury within the lamps, and they have a phosphorus coating. The coating inside the tube on fluorescence is phosphorus, which converts the blue photons within the tube into these other wavelengths. So most lighting technology is based on the same principle. That
is very interesting. Very interesting. Wow. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Second question, it was actually Jason's. Yesterday, we were talking a little bit about it, was the sun. How much photons do you receive from the sun, let's say on a clear day, on a cloudy day, and then let's say in the equator, and right there on the equator versus, let's say as far as Oregon or Washington?
Yeah, well, let's get into so what we've spoken about before is basically the quality of light. So what wavelengths of light are present in the spectrum that we're using, and what ratios are there within the spectrum. As I said, you don't really have to worry about them anymore with LEDs. Then you get to the quantity of light. So what you're talking about there is we're looking at trying to gauge a scale of where the maximum is and where the minimum is. So the measurements here sound terrible. They're micromoles per meter squared per second, which is a measurement of these tiny little packets of energy, these photons. And there's literally counting them in the billions and billions of them. But let's just say par for argument's sake. So we take the units out because they can sound confusing. So if we're talking about par level would be a sun midday, midsummer would be about 2000 micromoles, about 2000 par. So that'd be a measurement at a point. And if you were to measure that over a metered square. So if you had a tray and you were collecting those photons, you'd be collecting 2,000 micromoles, 2,000 par in that meter squared in 1 second. Now, plants can't really absorb all of that light, or at least they're not. Most of them are not designed to absorb all of that light. Most plants will grow. So if you take a shade sort of tolerant plant, will probably grow at about 200, 250 micromoles, and would probably be overexposed at maybe 500 or 600 micromoles. It would actually stress them and damage them. Medicinal herbs, we're talking about having a range between about 300 or 400, where you're just about getting enough growth, up to about 1,500. After that, the growth will taper off, and you might even overstress your plants, because particularly as we're doing this continuously, day after day, every day for long periods of time. What's interesting, in we were talking earlier about the 1,000 watt HPS and the 5x5. That, if properly set up with reflective walls and a good environment, would generate around 500 micromoles, 500 to 550 micromoles per meter square per second.
Wow.
That's at the top end of a 1,000 watt HPS performance. I'm specifying my lights for customers now at about 800 micromoles per meter square per second. And there are many now who are pushing that up to sort of 1,100 micromoles per second in their tent. And basically what we're doing is getting a higher yield out of the same space as we did previously, where the limiting factor really previously was the efficiency of the lighting system, i.e. the amount of heat that it output. So anybody who would have done it, and I have done it in one of the less sensible experiments that I did, was trying to run a 1,000 watt double-ended HPS in a 4x4. And for anybody who's done it, you're just battling with heat the whole time. You know, it's almost like having just a turbine of air trying to suck all that heat out. Modern lighting systems, LED lighting systems, are about twice as efficient now as the best high pressure sodium available. And that means we're halving the heat output compared to previous, a little bit more than half, actually about 60% reduction. And this means that we can push the level of lighting in our grow rooms and our tents much higher and achieve these higher performance levels.
Is most of the heat being generated coming from the driver or the LEDs themselves? Because a lot of manufacturers now, which I like, are allowing you to actually remove that driver to where you can install them outside your tent or your grow room or whatever. But is that where the bulk of the heat is from that driver and the work that it's doing to provide the source of power to those lights? Or do you find anything in that? Or
it's not the bulk of the heat, but it's fairly significant. So if you're using a 100 watt light in a 2x2, for example, your driver is probably going to be about 92% efficient. So it's going to be generating about 8 watts of heat, that driver, which is quite significant. Within the tent then, so you have 92% of the energy getting into the tent then, to the lighting system. And those LEDs, modern high efficiency LEDs, even budget stuff like, Spider Farmer or, Viper Spectre or whatever, they're up at about 2 micromoles per watt efficiency. And they would be generating about 50% of their energy. It would be going out in heat and about 50% in light. So it's about 50% of 92. So about 46 watts in the tent, about 8 watts outside the tent. So it's about a 5-to-1 relationship. About a fifth of the heat can be taken out by having your driver remote from the tent.
thank you.
Just a couple. Do you have any suggestions for Jason right now? Have you ever heard of the MIGRO light? We're testing that light for them.
I have, but I haven't actually tested one or had one in my hands, so I'm not familiar with them. What? Let me have a quick Google of them here, please.
Jason, maybe you can come on and talk a little bit
You
about
tell
that
me your
as well.
setup, please, Jason.
Hi, sure. I'm running the MIGRO light in a 4x4 tent.
Which one? The MetaGrow, do you know?
The Spectrum X.
Spectrum X.
And
I
is
don't
that a
know.
recent purchase?
Yeah,
Yeah, so that looks like a very high efficiency. It's a 720 watt one, is it?
I think it's 880, 800.
Wow.
It's over 800 with it has UVA, UV. I think it's UVB and infrared and all that. So it's got extra light bars. And without those, it's around 700 watts.
Yeah, so let's call it 750 watts for argument's sake. So the figures that I use in my review videos are a system efficiency. So what they do is they measure the amount of light reaching the plant canopy and therefore causing growth or affecting growth. So they take into account, for example, losses of light being absorbed by the reflective walls and not reaching the plants, etc. And so a system efficiency of that lighting system is likely to be about 2.2 micromoles per watt. So for every watt generated, you're getting about 2.2 micromoles reaching the plant canopy. So multiplying that by 750, we're at 1650 micromoles reaching your plant canopy. And then we divide that by meters squared, so it's by 1.44. So you're running a very, very high power level of about 1150 micromoles per meter square per second. So you're right up there, right up there. That's a very high performance level.
Yeah, and I'm not running the light at 100% either. It'd be a little bit much.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
running
I
at
would suggest.
65. How do
Yeah.
we get it higher and because even when I started interrupting, but when I review all the pictures of the plants after the grow, you could tell that even at 65%, the leaves are showing light intensity stress. And so how do we push that light past 65% and increase the yield without seeing these dramatic, stresses on the plant? Because some of them are good, but obviously too much is bad. Right.
Yeah, I think so. It is strain dependent. So I do know people who are growing some strains which seem to be able to tolerate that higher light intensity more than other strains. But to reduce the stress on the plant, CO2 is very useful. Bumping up the CO2 level, it's basically enabling the plant to respire more effectively and therefore photosynthesize more efficiently. That can be achieved relatively easy if you have a closed system, just by using a automated valve system to bump it up. It doesn't take a huge amount of CO2 to increase your concentration within the tent quite dramatically. In fact, I have a CO2 sensor, which are quite expensive. The accurate ones, they're $300 or $400. But I ran some experiments a couple of years ago, and I was in a very large room. So it was maybe 400 or 500 square feet, the room itself. And I had 4 or 5 tents in the corner. And when I came into work in the morning, so say at 8 a.m., I could actually see on the sensor the CO2 levels increasing by maybe 10 or 15% within about half an hour of me arriving in. And if I went in to look at the plants and I spent just a couple of minutes rooting around and checking stuff, that level would jump up quite significantly. One of the things with this is people tend to think that airflow is really important for the health of their plants. But plants don't use a huge amount of CO2. They don't absorb a huge quantity of it during the day. So if you can keep the temperatures down, by the use of AC, you can artificially raise the CO2 levels quite easily and quite cheaply, apart from the initial investment in the canisters and the valves and the sensors and all that stuff. However, what I say to most people is, before you sort of it's a bit like an arms race when you start adding all these things together. Sometimes it's better if you want to get more yield, is just use more space and grow over a larger area at a less high performance level, and it'll be easier on your plants and probably easier on you, to grow more. Just add another tent or get a larger tent, or expand your area. But if you're limited in space and you want to push it, really maximize it, supplement with CO2, and that stress from light burn will be greatly reduced, and you will extract more effective efficiency out of your light level. So the curve in terms of growth compared to par is pretty much a straight line up to about 800 or 900 micromoles, and then it starts to taper off. But you can keep that line straight by supplementing with CO2.
And good nutrients. Your nutrients have to be in line too.
Yeah, everything else has to be on point. Yeah, you have to be keeping up. You have to be keeping up. And this is the other thing. If somebody is saying it to me, they're going to go to 1200 micromoles or something, and I find they're growing in soil or cocoa, I'm like, well, if you want to invest, you'd probably be better off going hydro and keep your light level where it is, because again, you're going to extract more out of the whole system,
right?
And be more likely to take advantage of those high light levels with a when you're getting nutrients more and air more effectively to your roots, for example.
Right. Yeah, that's important. Because the uptake, the method of how the nutrients, one's being broken down by microbial life, bacteria, fungi, and the other one's more salt-based, being more or less force-fed, or it's in a different form availability for that plant. So it's not waiting on the soil microbial life to aid in it. So that makes sense. I didn't think about it like that.
Well, I've run side-by-side experiments, just growing chilies now, but growing clones, and exactly the same lighting setup, exactly the same environment, and just using the different media. So from soil to cocoa up to hydro, DWC, and I found that you get about a 30-40% increase from soil to cocoa, and then you get about the same again going up to hydro. So it's increasing the quantity of light is not always the best solution to getting a better yield.
Yeah.
Ken, you had something?
Yes, I just wanted to, in regard to the MIGRO lights, I just wanted to point out that Dr. MJ Coco has done 2 video reviews, and the Easy 8 1000 watt, he says it's the best value light for the money on the market from everything he's seen. So I maybe check those videos out. And I would like you to maybe think about doing a video review of one of the MIGRO lights, possibly. I know, yeah. I've seen your recent reviews of the Grow 300 and the HLG 350R. I know you think very highly of them.
Yep.
Which of those two is, in your opinion, the most efficient?
Of the HLG and the which, sorry?
The Grow 300 by Grow Light Science.
The HLG is about 4% more efficient. So the HLG generates 2.51 micromoles per watt system efficiency, and the Grow 300 is 2.41, I think, from memory. So they're very close. I would have to say that so in terms of value for money, the last 18 months or so as a grow lighting manufacturer has been terrifying, because the Chinese have upped their game. The quality of their lights is much better, and they're getting cheaper almost by the month. And there's lots of new entrants to the market as well. Big companies who have brought out lighting brands and are selling LED lighting now, and they're also excellent. I start to get into analogies about cars when I talk about grow lights, to try and give people perspective, because if you're some people will see wisdom and economy in buying a secondhand car that's 10 years old, like I do.
Yeah.
And other people will see economy in buying the latest, most efficient car, and getting the highest efficiency from the newest tech. there's lots of different ways to come at the, there's lots of ways to get to the same point, I suppose. And with regard to lighting, as I said, it's not as much now about efficiency, because most of the lights that I review now, as I said, in the sort of mid to high price range are within 5%, maybe 8% of each other's results in terms of efficiency. But HLG, for example, they don't coat their LEDs, so they don't have a coating on them. Their fixtures are quite basic. They're not the most attractive. They don't have as many features as some other lights, so they're not as suitable for daisy chaining and other things like that. So it's horses for courses, really. First of all, it's in terms of selecting a grow light for yourself, it's establishing what you want to do. So how much do you want to grow? What your space is, available space is, and what shape that space is. Getting a light that suits that space and generates, again, this range of about 700 to 900 micromoles average within your space, so that you're maximizing your space, but not overbuying or overdoing it. And then, it's who do you trust, who's generating good quality, who's reliable, who gives good service. It is usually somewhere between $300-400, maybe up to $700-800 of a purchase. If something goes wrong, how easy is it going to be to fix it? How good is the warranty going to be? All that sort of stuff. So,
where do you distribute your lights?
I beg your pardon?
Where do you distribute your lights? Is it mainly only the UK?
Yeah, it may. No, actually, the biggest market for me would be US, then UK, then Canada, and probably rest of Europe.
I have that when I observe the LEDs that come off of China and other markets versus even some of your LEDs. I actually do see how you set up your electrodes, or just the panels, I guess, how you set them up more spread out and like kind of like exactly how you just described. You're like, maybe don't use as much light, but spread it out a little bit more. And I do see a little bit more efficiency through the and thoughtfulness through the design of your lights than through, like we're talking Spider Farm. It's clumped together. I see that a lot.
That again, so that format, or that structure of having, this same panel, so to use your square rectangular LED panel, and they're using the same panel for the, the 100-watt light as the 200-watt light, so they just basically add them on. The 400-watt light has 4 panels. There's a slight little limitation there in that it is still quite concentrated in the center, and that actually has an effect on efficiency, because in order to not generate a hotspot underneath, you have to raise them quite high relative to a more physically spread out fixture like the LED bar type lights. And that means you're going to get more reflectance losses. So more light is going to bounce around and not reach your plant canopy the higher the fixture is relative to your plant canopy. And the spread of light is not going to be as good. So but then again, they're cheaper, so again, it swings and roundabouts, really. It's a lot of it is how much your budget is, how much you're willing to put into your grow and invest in your lighting setup, and how long term you're into it and all that type of thing.
Well, the reason why I was kind of asking a couple of these questions is because, so have you ever done any flowering around for photo plants around 16 hours of light versus 18?
Not with photos, no.
So I kind of talk to growers like it, where if they're, this is my question is, can they run the lights with less time and still get the same output? Because for outdoor growing, they need 15.5 hours of twilight hours. And I've tracked this worldwide, have a master list of when plants go into veg and when they start flowering for outdoor growing. And as I track the light, it's always 15.5 hours angled to the twilight, civil twilight specifically. So that means 15.5 hours of light. Like it is what they need to stay in veg.
So
naturally.
you're trying to achieve the DLI in a shorter amount of time. Is kind of your thinking?
See, DLI is a new term to me. I'm all by feel. So what is DLI, straight up? And can we relate it to what I'm talking about right now to find more efficiency and productivity and cost cutting?
Yeah, so daily light integral is a complicated way of saying how much light the plants receive over their lights on time, over a normal day cycle. And so integral just means including everything under that graph over a period of time. So how much it's accumulated. So if we'll go back to our analogy of our 1 meter squared and our photons falling down onto that plane, we're counting the amount of photons over the whole light period. So a normal DLI is you multiply the power level by the number of seconds, so by 60, by the number of minutes, by 60, by the number of hours, and you'll get a figure called the DLI, and it's usually measured in moles. And typically, for example, if you're a greenhouse grower and you're using supplemental lights, that your biggest, your most light hungry plant will be, say, tomatoes, for example. You'd be targeting for maximum productivity about 40 DLI. And that would equate to about 1,000 micromoles over a 12-hour light cycle. If you're growing with autoflowers and you're growing and your lights on is for 20 hours a day, for example, you can achieve that same, yes, there's my graph, yeah. You can achieve the same DLI with a lower light intensity because the lights on period is longer. So, yeah, and you can divide that simply. You just multiply it by 20 over 12 or divide it by 20 over 12. So you need about 30-40% more light, or you need about 30-40% less light with autoflowers than you do with photos to achieve the same sort of DLI.
Yeah, I had to share this from your video. If people haven't seen this video, I recommend to go see this, because before I saw this was my feeling deep down was, from my observations, and I just started off with autos for the first time, but my observations was once I started increasing certain amounts of light, the plant didn't like it, and I'm observing that the autos seem to need a little bit less. But throughout the communities, you hear on different channels and forums and stuff, people talking about, oh no, autos need double the nutrients, double the light, and I'm sitting back from my observations like, and then you came out with this video, and I was like, all right, here's some math to kind of show this. Like I had to share it. It's really nice.
Yeah. I think in Excel, I'm afraid.
Yeah. That's most of our videos actually, is we're always bringing up Excel. I'm like, oh man, we had to, I'm asking the editors to find pictures so they hide the Excel spreadsheets.
Yeah. That's my corporate background coming out in Excel's PowerPoint slides.
Shane?
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you about the Emerson enhancement effect. Could you please explain that and how it applies to the power spectrum?
Yeah, so this is one of those theories which have been mutilated on forums and various other places into something unrecognizable. So really, the Emerson effect is basically if you shine just one wavelength of light at a plant with, say, 100 micromoles, you will get, for example, 1 unit of growth. If you shine it with a different wavelength with 100 micromoles, you'll get 100 units of growth. If you use 2 of those wavelengths together and shine with 200 micromoles, you'll get maybe 210 units of, 2.1 units of growth. So using multiple frequencies simultaneously will generate more growth than the same quantum of light in a single frequency. And really it's really experimental stuff which has almost no bearing on reality, because nobody's going around shining just one narrow band wavelength of light at something. But what people have taken from that, and in particular manufacturers which include far red LEDs and are trying to sell them as a benefit, is that adding far red LEDs, which are less photosynthetically efficient than red or green or blue to start with, that putting energy into those will somehow multiply the growth you're getting from the power spectrum.
Mhm.
Whereas that Emerson effect is happening within the power spectrum in any case. So it is it's misdirected or misinterpreted science, expecting that you can get some sort of magic multiplier effect by adding a few far red LEDs. The far red LEDs are less efficient than the red ones, so just add more light. If you want more growth, more light. There's no real magic that occurs at either end of the spectrum where you can kind of, you know, have this little lever that you can, you know, pull that will increase the efficiency of the main photons in the power spectrum. So it's a misused term, a misused piece of theory. People searching for solutions where there doesn't need to be solutions. You know, we've got LEDs now which generate this fantastic spectrum, which is almost tailor-made for exactly what we would want. We want to have pretty much as much red as possible because that's the most photosynthetically efficient by 10 or 15%, but it's more efficient. We want enough blue to keep the plant growth short and dense, and around 10% is optimum. And lo and behold, you know, 3K color temperature LEDs, it's about 10, 12%. And we want some green in the middle because it, you know, we can see our plants properly, and also it bounces around it goes deeper into the leaves and bounces around. There's another one, Dave, I don't know if you can get the graphic up. I put it up on Instagram about a year ago, and it's from a guy called Bruce Bugby, who's a very renowned scientist in the field. And it's a visualization of different light wavelengths penetrating into a leaf. So you can see
wow, I want to see that one.
Blue, green, and red photons penetrate into the leaf, and it's quite interesting to see. And so the leaf under the outer layer has a section which can photosynthesize, and it's quite deep. Red only barely touches the surface; it doesn't penetrate very much. Blue does a little bit better, and green and far red actually go further down into the leaf. But that's why, as I said, green is beneficial. But all of those photons within the power spectrum will cause growth, will cause photosynthesis and growth.
Through your experience of getting so many different types of lights, a lot of newer lights looks like they're starting to come out more with controls for more or less simulating sunrise and sunset, to where potential spectrum changes or less intensity in the morning, maybe peaking in noon, you know, basically, once again, people trying to simulate what nature's done for millions of years. You know, so with the variety of lights, you know, we've talked, the spectrums are pretty dang close. You might have a little bump in IR, you know, UV, infrared, you know, but overall the spectrums are the same. Do you see an advantage of now messing with the sunrise and sunset? Because in my mind, like I think there's something to it. For me, like if my lights turn on and they're not being blasted with 350, 400 watts or 800 par, whatever, but maybe gradually work themselves up to those levels. And same thing with night, where maybe it goes more towards the far red. And that's always seems to be what people are saying throughout the communities. Well, think about a sunset, there's way more reds. And then you look in, you know, even the older LEDs with Blurple, you had a veg, and then you had the bloom switch, you know, which was simulating different varieties of the color spectrum. What's your thoughts on that?
So the blue and the red switch on the Blurple LEDs was because they could. And it's back to the flashing lights on the stereo. You know, it makes us feel like we're doing something and like we're contributing and we're having a positive effect. Plants don't care. The plants do not care about that. So the Traditionally, in the past, we used metal halide in the early stages of growth. Metal halide was less efficient, so it put out less light intensity. But that wasn't really needed with young plants. What we wanted was a good start with short, dense growth. And metal halide has about 23% blue in it, really high levels of blue. So really keep the plants short and dense. And then we'd switch over to high pressure sodium, which had a higher efficiency. So more photons when the plants need it to bulk, to put on, to grow the flowers and to put on weight and mass. But the downside was the spectrum wasn't optimal. So that was in the past. We don't need to use that technology anymore. We don't need that system. We've now got LEDs that have a perfectly balanced spectrum, which is perfect all the way through the growth phases. It's optimized. It's perfect. We don't need anything else. So those dials and switches, I don't like. There are, for example, if you were growing ornamentals for a supermarket, for example, and you were growing maybe petunias or something, there are, so long day and short day plants, for example, you can stimulate them to flower by using infrared, for example, at nighttime, or far red, I should say. You can stimulate them to generate longer leaves, for example. So you can use warm white or low levels of blue with additional far red, and you can generate lots of leafage from the plant. And so, for example, that might be useful with growing leafy veg, like lettuces and things like that. You can also use high levels of blue to bring out the blue in the plants. So if you're growing a blue variety of lettuce, you could bring out the colors. There's things you can do with very specific plants in very specific situations, which is very useful for growers in very specific situations. What we're doing is we're growing a weed, something that will grow under anything, doesn't really care, just give it more and it'll grow more. There's not really any useful parts of the spectrum where you can, for example, stimulate flowering or any of those sorts of things. They're photoperiodic, so they're going to do it from the photoperiod, not from the spectrum. So in short, there's not, to my mind, there's no proven benefit to tweaking the spectrum around at various stages. It doesn't really make sense to me. I'm not sure what characteristics people are trying to improve. When the plant is going to grow away anyway, it's going to do its thing anyway. What was the other part of your question?
So no, you answered it. So basically,
sunrise and sunset. Sorry, sunrise and sunset.
Yes.
So in terms of the sunrise sunset, I did experiments trying to understand was there anything in it. And what I did was I put time-lapse cameras into tents, and so plants do move. You see the leaves drooping and raising again during the day. And I was doing the sunset, sunrise thing and different programs, and I couldn't see any difference in the plant's behavior. In terms of the growth rate, what you're doing with the sunrise, sunset thing is you're losing time, you're losing intensity over time.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really understand. I think there's a big desire for people to want to find these things, which I can kind of understand. They want to mess around, they want to play with things, and they want to experiment, which is great. But I've never seen anything proven. And I speak a lot to commercial people outside of growing medicinal herbs, and they would just laugh at this stuff. They would be much more industrial focused, in terms of, if you want to grow a plant as much as possible, you maximize the light, you maximize you maximize everything over the time that you have, and it'd be frivolous to be playing around with things like that.
There's still, it's funny. I mean, to the most nth degree, I mean, we're still, the speed of light is still being challenged, right? The theory of speed of light. So, not to dive into that, but my point to this is that the chemical reaction, the length of the chemical reaction, the length of time of what we're discussing of light hitting the plants, right? I mean, the light isn't just, and it's like what you're saying. And can you jump to that next slide? What we were talking about, Dave? Have you ever done any experiments with LED lights or in general with just giving a very basic NPK versus giving a complete assortment of trace minerals with like its full benefit? I know that might sound redundant or health of the plant what we discussed, but my point is, and this is bro science in my mind, but when light hits something, it creates a spectrum. I mean, that's the general knowledge we've been taught. And so with dependent, and I've always told people that gemstones are spectrums. They're low crystalline structures, right? So in my mind, if every gemstone will vibrate or will probably emit a different type of spectrum of some level, or I'm not sure, I could be wrong, but with having all of the trace minerals that the plant can provide, and obviously they're placing these minerals in the leaves where photosynthesis is happening, is the light hitting these trace minerals in the plants, is it creating or emitting different types of spectrums or frequencies?
I would doubt it. I don't really. So I don't know if you've ever looked or tried to understand photosynthesis as a reaction, but it is extraordinary. There's about 8 separate chain reactions that occur within the cells of plants in terms of the photosynthesis reaction. It is extraordinarily complicated. It is something that I will never understand. And I have sat there and stared at pages and listened to lectures and tried to get my head around it. And it's a very complex chemical reaction. So I don't pretend to know it. And as I said, I don't think I ever will understand it. But I have spoken to people who do understand it. And they're quite reductive, in terms of the things that I've spoken about thus far, with regard to spectrum and regard to growth rate, so the light intensity versus growth rate. They would break it down, they would break the spectrum down generally into blue, green, and red, and the different responses that plants would have to those bands of wavelengths. And generally, they wouldn't go much further than that. So
their knowledge might be limited through this process too, because I agree with you. Photosynthesis 1, 2, it's a complicated
these
process.
Would be the most knowledgeable people I've found in the, they'd be very, very knowledgeable, and they're quite comfortable in, as I said, breaking down light into blue, green, and red, far red, and UV. Well, UVA and UVB, they would subcategorize those, but broadly we can talk about the effect that light has on plants by talking about those categories, the blue, green, and red, and really it's mostly about the proportions of them relative to each other within light spectrum, and the general, for ourselves, for growing medicinal herbs indoors. As I said, the proportions of blue and far red are important. Adding UVB can have an effect, but other than that, I have certainly never heard anything that would lead me to believe that there's any other secrets, sort of, or
how about the microbiology? Is the length of time? Sorry to interrupt you. Is the length of time of light or type of spectrum, have you noticed it have you done any lab analysis in soil to see how it affects the microbiology at any level?
No.
Okay. This is really, okay. I really love it. I appreciate the conversation. These are just random questions that, you know, you're a light guy, and I feel there's a connection in this process. And I just want to see where you go with it.
There's two guys I've interviewed, and the videos are on my channel. They're sort of half an hour to 45 minutes long. They're not too long to get through. There's one guy, Dr. Eric Runkel, who is an expert in this field, and another guy, Bruce Bugby. Both would be, you know, at the top of their game, and would be very knowledgeable. And, you know, I've interviewed them about the effects of light on plant growth. So not necessarily the light intensity versus yield, but, you know, about the spectral effects or the effects of different wavelengths on growth. And as I said, they're quite comfortable being quite reductive and talking about the spectrum in terms of just being broken down into colors, and the effect of those different colors in terms of the proportions of mix in the mix. As I said, if you can go to you know, stuff like bedding plants and growing specific herbs or leafy veg indoors, and you can use light spectrum to emphasize characteristics in the plant or timing of events in terms of when plants would flower, for example, or the quantity of flowers. But very little of that is relevant when we're talking about medicinal herbs. They don't generally tend to be that affected by those ratios. They're not that sensitive.
I'm gonna go check out those videos.
I'm very proud of them, actually. I really enjoy them. I learned a lot from them, and you know, I think they're probably the best stuff that I put out there.
I'm gonna watch those videos. They sound like they're the next step in my evolutionary learning curve in this process.
Yeah, what might disappoint you is there's not huge amounts to learn, as I said, in that you can, once you get those general sort of rules or guides, you know, there's not a huge amount more to add on to that.
Ken.
Yeah, Mark, I just wanted to say that Jeff Lowenfels, are you familiar with Jeff Lowenfels?
I've heard his name, and these three people I'm gonna definitely reach out to both of you guys and see if I can get connected with them and talk to them a little bit more about this.
Okay.
What's the name again, Ken, please?
Jeff Lowenfels. He's the author of 3 books on soil microbiology, teaming with microbes.
Oh yeah, I know. I've read his book 25 times. Why didn't I recognize his name? Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyways, he swears that there are some microbes, soil microbes, that are photosynthetic. You were asking about how the microbiology. So
because I've always had this theory about creating a bio, I don't even want to create a name for it, but basically solar cells with plants, and I don't understand why we can't take that photosynthesis and transfer into electricity through the process of microbiology or something and actually make it into electricity. I'm always wondering, and I've heard a few people talk about various things, but it just, you know, are they just crackpots getting high and thinking about stuff like me or whatever? So
if I may, Shane, I'd like to ask you another question in relation to the Emerson effect. Is this a proven law, or is it just an experimental debated theory?
Oh, it is proven, yeah.
Okay, so does that mean
there is a lady? Yeah. Oh, I must post this actually because I watched it recently. It's an Indian lady. I can't remember her name now, but I will post something up on YouTube about it. Who describes this effect? Breaks it down into its constituent parts and explains it simply. Again, it's a little bit out of my league in terms of, you know, it is photobiology, it is a whole area of its own. But again, you can be quite reductive with it. Once you've gone through it, you don't have to fully understand it. She explains it in the end, and you do get this marginal improvement by using multiple wavelengths together up in that red to far red area. it has this effect. But we've already got out of our standard LED spectrum, we've got sufficient quantity or ratio of those red to far red wavelengths to cause the Emerson effect in its full effect from your standard light fitting. In fact, you get it from your light fitting you're using above your head there at home. You know, it's nothing special in the sense that we are getting those photons, we're getting those ratios in our light spectrum already, but there's not really anything else to be gained.
So this effect only applies to the red and not to the blue and the green?
The experiment was done with wavelengths in those areas because, again, they could only narrow down wavelengths based on the technology that they had, and they had, you know, red LEDs are at 660 nanometers, far red LEDs are at 730 nanometers. You know, that's a result of the property of the material that's being stimulated, you know, to produce these photons. And so, you know, they have done other experiments where they've used filters to filter out other and used very narrow band. But again, the proportions that they talk about to get the maximum Emerson effect are the same proportions that we have coming from our standard LEDs. And our standard LEDs, by the way, do have some far red in them. Your standard white LED will have about 3-4% far red in them anyway. And there are lots of papers out there suggesting that if you go above 5 or 6% far red, you start to stimulate stretching, and you need to increase your blue to weigh that against each other. And then what are you doing? What's the point of it? It's you're just battling with yourself. You're creating complexity where there doesn't need to be any.
Okay, so in regard to the blue, for example, would there be any benefit in having 3 different bands of blue in the spectrum?
There already is. So as I said, the wavelengths are continuous right through the blue spectrum, in any LED, from any LED grow light.
Okay.
Mike, you had a question? Ken, I appreciate you, man. Thank you
Hello,
so much.
Shane. My name is Michael Barbie. I'm in northern Quebec. I'm a big scale grower, and I've seen 80% of your videos. And yeah, no, serious. Every single light that I have bought, you've been my benchmark for quality. I've followed you. Even I really appreciate all those videos of the low end videos that you made on the Amazon. Was a big help to me. And I would just, in reference of a video you put out a couple of months ago, talking about the prevalence of high pressure sodium. At the point your opinion changed over the time, where you always were a proponent of high pressure sodium. Then you said the LEDs are such improved that they're not longer acceptable or relevant. But I'm in northern Canada, and I use the LED. I use the sodiums for heat as much as I do for lighting. And especially that you came out with a report saying the double-ended sodiums are a lot more efficient than we originally thought. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. So if you want more heat in your grow area, the benefit with HPS is that they emit infrared. They actually radiate heat. So they will heat the canopy by radiant heat. You know, most people growing indoors don't want that heat. It's going to cause stress, and it's a negative. In your situation, obviously, it's a positive, and therefore you're getting benefit of that energy. But for other people, that would be wasted energy. In fact, they would be expending more energy to get rid of that energy. So it's a double sort of whammy. But my starting point with high pressure sodium and ceramic metal halide was that, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, they were still more efficient than most LEDs on the market. Yeah. So, you know, that ratio has changed. So LED efficiency, when I started 5-6 years ago, the best LED systems had a system efficiency of about 1.6 micromoles per watt. The best did, but most of them were about 1.2 micromoles per watt. And high pressure sodium, your 600 or 1000 watt systems are more efficient than the lower wattage, but your 600 or 1000 watt systems and system efficiency, if well set up with a good reflector, would be about 1.2, 1.3 micromoles per watt. So in the early day of LEDs, HPS were still better than quite a lot of them, and much cheaper. I used to sell ceramic metal halide lights myself. I thought they're excellent technology. You could use them right the way through the grow, really nice quality of light, highly efficient too. And they were cheaper than a lot of LED systems. But now, apart from people like yourself, Mike, who need that radiant heat, LEDs are much cheaper than they were 5 years ago. So they're probably 40% of the upfront investment cost, but most significantly, they're at least 50% more efficient. A lot of them are twice as efficient than they were 5 years ago. So the story has really changed quite significantly over the last 4 or 5 years.
Now, my next question is watching all your videos, you said to a lot of people in your videos that the LED industry is at a point that the lights are so strong that, they can't make them. The plant can only take so many amount of photons. So we don't need like 1400 watts or whatever. I'm giving that as an example. But what do you think about the next evolution in the industry will be the controllers? Do you think the controllers are going to be the next big thing with the LEDs? Because the LEDs can't get any stronger. So
they can get a little bit more efficient, which will, just give you a better return rate on your investment. So you'll be using less energy, and in our in the times today, any sort of improvement in efficiency is going to reduce our carbon footprint and all that sort of stuff. So it's all beneficial. I do think with the higher light intensity that people are using these days, I think there's going to be innovation around that. So I think people are going to find that there's limitations elsewhere in their setup. So they're pushing their light levels higher, but as I think Jason was talking about earlier, he was getting tip burn on the leaves and the higher parts of the canopy from basically getting too much light intensity during the day. So I think CO2 technology is probably going to develop. We're probably going to get cheaper controls around that. And also, understanding what medium or media and what strains are going to take advantage of these higher light intensities as well. I think that's going to be an area. In terms of the control of the lighting systems themselves, what I found really nice and I want to develop certainly for my lighting system is just the simplicity in terms of modularity of being able to connect your power supplies together, for example, control them simultaneously, less power connections, so daisy chaining them, neatening the system up. Durability, reliability is pretty much there now at the moment. As I said, efficiency is very close in the sort of mid to high price range. Light spread has got very good, more even with the bar type fixtures. There's been a lot of really great innovation in the last 4 or 5 years. I do think though we're kind of maturing as a technology. It's kind of maturing at the moment, and we're kind of getting close to an optimum sort of system now, given the technology, the LED technology we have.
I agree.
Nice.
The LED quality now is come up so much that, like, I agree with your statement saying the high pressure sodiums are no more relevant, but unless you're in a situation like I am where you need to heat, because it's cheaper for me to run some LEDs than to heat my room on plot, like have an extra cost of heating. The other thing, Mike,
with high pressure sodium is for supplemental lighting. So, in terms of supplemental in a greenhouse, for example, HPS is excellent because it's relatively high efficiency with a low capital cost. You're not using it that much, so it's not as important to have high efficiency. So high pressure sodium is still relevant in terms of, and you still see it. recently was abroad and flying over, landing into Holland early morning and seeing these acres of greenhouses all lit up in their orange color because they're still using their high pressure sodium systems. So, they're definitely still relevant. And for some people, I could take myself, for example, I'm consuming a lot less as I get older. I've got young kids around, so who are getting older and more inquisitive. So I've had to stop growing at home. But as I was tapering down, I was only growing for maybe doing 2 cycles over the winter. And if you're growing in winter, you're only doing a couple of cycles. Using a CMH or a high pressure sodium setup makes sense. However, if you're using it day in, day out, 365 days a year, I think LEDs beat them hands down now.
I agree with you, because the LEDs I got to use in the summertime. I'm only talking in the colder weather when things.
The other thing as well is, Mike, is mix them up. There's a lot of people who are afraid to do this, but mix them up so you can have. There's different hanging heights and there's some complexity there, but some people come into me with older lighting systems. A guy came in today and he had a 5 or 6 year old cob fixture, is 400 watts. He had a 4x4 and he was looking to upgrade and he wanted to get an Array 8 to me. And I convinced him to buy less than he originally thought, because I was just saying, keep your existing light. It's fine. Just run it until it runs out. You're not going to get as much yield, but he wasn't that bothered about his yield. He just wanted to grow a few more plants. So, keep your older fixtures, add ones on, run them out. Anything over 4 or 5 years old now will be as high enough efficiency that you should probably keep running them and not throw them out. You should use them up until they're finished, and it's probably a more efficient, less environmentally impactful way of using your system.
Absolutely. Just don't upgrade because marketing is telling you to upgrade. Use out your equipment until they wear out. That's the best thing.
Unless you're having serious problems with heat or something that are holding you back. But if it's still putting out light, it's still causing growth, it's still adding to your yield, use it.
Right. So the next thing I wanted to discuss, you did go over infrared and UV, but the next biggest thing in the market, other than people talking about Samsung diodes, is UVA and UVB. So we got a little plug for you. MIGRO has the UVB 310, which does have UVB and UVA. So can you get into this? Because, oh my gosh, like amongst the community, some people say only use it for 5 minutes. Some say, no, don't use B, only use A. Some say only use A, don't use B. Its benefits, I pulled up your specs here for an example. People can see the levels of intensity. And then if you can also explain with the test, why no reflective? Is there a reason behind that? Is it because of that wavelength?
Why no reflective? What did you say there?
On your, I assume this is the par reading or the light intensity.
It's not par, strictly speaking. It is counting photons. It's measuring photons.
So on the bottom
par spectrum, so they're not actually going to cause any growth.
So on the bottom of your spec,
for photosynthesis.
So at the bottom of your spec right here, it says no reflective walls, set up 5x5. Yeah.
Yeah. So the note there about reflective walls is that so UVB, as we know, because if you're in a car with glass, the glass will screen you from UVB. You won't get a suntan under glass, for example. It's also the same for any material, see-through material. So on a lot of reflective walls, the Mylar on their tent walls, for example, that's coated in a very fine coat of acrylic usually, and that prevents the UVB being reflected back. Raw metal, so untreated metal, will reflect UVB. So the reflectors that I use, for example, are raw aluminium. It's an unanodized, uncoated aluminium. You can also use something as simple as foil, aluminium foil, if you wish. I don't know if you remember in the 70s, but there used to be these, the guys on the beach with the foil around them to to get the maximum amount of suntan. Well, they were using UVB science. They were reflecting those UVB photons using foil back up onto themselves. It'll also reflect off the surface of water. But in any case, UVB has it's not about growth. It's not about the shape of the plant or the way the plant grows. It's a different stimulus. You're stimulating it to generate oils. Some people call it the sunscreen effect. But if you think, I don't know if my first experience of really understanding that this technology worked was actually in the UK, and it was with, it was with commercial growers growing herbs, as in edible herbs for supermarkets. And they're using UVB in a greenhouse setting, and they're using it for rosemary and basil and other aromatic herbs. And there is a distinct difference. Any gardener will know this in terms of particularly with rosemary, for example. If you grow it in the greenhouse, it'll be sort of dry, and it won't have the same level of aroma. It won't have that sticky aromatic feel and smell to it. Whereas if you grow it out in the sun, it will. And that's as a result of UVB. UVB will stimulate the plant to generate these oils as a sunscreen. And in our environment, in our setup, we don't particularly want to use UVB in the earlier stages of growth, because it's diverting energy from the plant from growing into protecting itself. We don't even want to use it in the early stages of flowering, because again, you're trying to get the bulk, you're trying to get the mass on, the growth rate up. But in the latter stages of flowering, so the last 2 or 3 weeks, we can use it sparingly. So just a couple of hours per day is sufficient, with a relatively low intensity. So that graph that you have up there, Dave, is the center point measurement there is 140 microwatts per centimeter squared. That's about the level you would get in mid-morning in the summer, for example. It'd be a bit higher, it might go up closer to 200 at midday, but it's a relatively low level of intensity for a relatively short time, maybe about 2 hours during at some point, at midpoint in the light cycle, for example, light cycle, I should say. And that will stimulate not cannabinoids, so it doesn't increase THC or CBD, but it does improve the flavonoids and the terpenes. So it will increase basically oil production, and it'll improve the quality. It'll improve the smell and the taste.
Right.
Excellent.
And by the way, UVA does not stimulate this. So manufacturers, again, they put these UVA LEDs on their fixtures. It is not going to have this effect. UVA is, from a plant point of view, is the same as blue. It is somewhat photosynthetic, but most of all, it causes cell contraction. It causes shorter, more dense plants.
So with the UVB 310, the 25% UVA, is that just to kind of simmer down the UVB, or what was the mindset through your light?
It's technology limited. So these are basically the same as tanning lamps.
Okay.
So the glass, there's a special type of glass on these fluorescent tubes, which will allow the UVB through, not UVC, thankfully, but it will allow UVB through. But it still has a phosphorus coating on the inside, and that means it will still generate some visible light as well. So it'll absorb some of these UVB photons, and it'll output different wavelengths of photons all the way up into the visible spectrum, up to green and even a very tiny bit of red. That is a byproduct. It's not by design. If I was to design it and had free reign, we would just be producing UVB between about 290 and about 315, 320 nanometers, because that's the effective range of the UVB in terms of wanting to generate this response, to stimulate this response from the plant.
Yeah, good information. And if anyone's interested in it, you can check them out over at MIGRO.com. Just an FYI, I was on there, and due to high demand, it looks like shipping might be delayed till mid-December. So it looks like
there's this COVID hangover, which is all the ports are congested internationally, and what used to take me 4 or 5 weeks to get from Asia is now taking 10 or 12 weeks. So
no, it's understandable. We're gonna end it with this, and feel free to add anything or anyone here. And it's just kind of, is that really true? This is stuff that I hear still on a daily, weekly, monthly basis throughout the communities. People are saying that LED light in general is causing certain deficiencies in plants like calcium and magnesium, where I'm thinking more or less the popularization of the media source via Cocoa or Rockwell or stuff might be bringing out these. Have you heard this, or is there anything to back that LEDs are potentially causing deficiencies?
I have heard it, and I haven't experienced it myself, but I have heard it, and I've heard it from experienced growers who have switched from one to the other. I think it may be more, there's a higher, they have a higher light intensity than they did previously.
Yeah, that's what I tell them too. I tell them there's more efficiency on these.
I think that's one aspect to it. But other than that, I don't know anything further than that, I'm afraid. Sorry.
Okay, no. And then another thing I hear, I think I was in a conversation the other day with people, that white or certain white paints or white poly has a better reflective property than Mylar.
Yeah, so I have a few videos out. I must do one again actually, because I haven't done it in years. It used to be my favorite sort of hobby horse to rant about. So and the reason I originally did it was because, do you remember Orca film? I don't know if you ever heard of it.
Yes, I do.
Again,
I used to sell it.
Yeah, very expensive, highly marketed product.
It had diamonds and all kinds of shapes in it, and mist bumps, like it was painted different. If I remember straight, different Mylars had different designs on their patterns too, for efficiency.
So it's fortunate. It's one of those few areas in life where it is actually very simple and cheap to get the best performance. So first thing is, matte white emulsion paint is the best surface other than Mylar. So using Orca material, or people think that because it's a gloss finish on white paint that it'll reflect more. It's not true. A simple, cheap white emulsion paint is very effective. The problem though is that it's non-directional. So when a light beam hits a white emulsion surface, it can bounce off in any direction. And generally we have our light fitting up here, and we have our plant canopy down here. And the light is going to bounce off the side. The stray light, or the potential overspill light, is going to bounce off the wall. And what we want to is bounce down, not everywhere. So Mylar is a little bit more effective, a little bit more efficient than white emulsion paint, because it'll reflect directionally. It'll go down. So your basic Mylar is a very sophisticated product. It's a plastic sheet where they use this really sophisticated way of, what's it called? You use a spray. When you use a spray and it goes into lots of small particles.
Yeah, particles. This is what I was describing. They're changing the texture of these films.
Anyway, they basically spray paint the aluminium onto plastic sheeting, and it generates a perfect surface. It's very thin, it's very fine, but it's a perfect aluminium surface, very highly reflective. You can get a higher reflectivity using a very complex process, but Mylar is within a few percent of the best that you can achieve. So Mylar is a really, really good material. I found the flat Mylar can be problematic because you can get a bit of waviness in it. And because of that, you can actually get focused bits of light. So it can act like a lens, basically, and it can focus the light, and you can get high intensity spots on your plant canopy using just the very flat plain stuff. So I recommend using the diamond Mylar, which has the small little indentations on it. It just diffuses the light a little bit and gets away from those high intensity spots. You know, when the light is shining off a pool, the surface of a pool and you see it reflecting on the wall, and you can see those, at points there's a high level of light. It's the same thing happens with the sort of a wavy mylar wall on your tent.
Like the walkie-talkie building. That walkie-talkie building that melts cars' side view mirrors.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Parabolic lens.
Yeah.
Focusing that light.
Exactly. It's the same sort of effect is happening there. So what I recommend, and again, I have videos, they're old now, I must refresh them, but I have videos and I have little experiments and posts and all this sort of stuff on best reflective materials. And as I said, sometimes the best thing is the simplest thing.
Yeah.
Diamond mylar is within about 5 or 10% as effective as white paint. But it's both are very good. White emulsion paint, matte white emulsion paint, but both are very effective.
Nice. That's really good information. And for the last one, unless anyone else wants to bring up any myths or is there truth behind it, is if you don't have Samsung diodes, it's not good. I mean, this is so. I mean,
and Ken, we'll get to you right after as well. I know you want to ask.
Yeah. Me. So
Samsung B, Samsung A. I understand the bin selections and all that, but do you know of other manufacturers reputable? Can we put this to rest that
you don't have dozens and dozens of them? And by the way, the Chinese ones that used to be a little bit iffy 4 or 5 years ago have now got, so Epistar and a few of the other ones have got excellent now in the last few years. They're reliable. So Samsung, first of all, the spectrum, not the output, the base technology of the LED is the same as every other one. It uses the same wafer technology, the same phosphor technology. They just higher efficiency LEDs just have better tolerances, basically. There were reliability issues with early LEDs from some other manufacturers, but if you're buying, generally, if it's fairly big brand, you're generally okay. So, I use Seoul semiconductors. I use Samsungs as well. I use Osram sometimes. I used to use Lumi LEDs. I used to use Bridgelux. All of them emit the same spectrum. It doesn't make any difference to your plant growth rate. After that, it's about system efficiency. And a lot of that has to do with not just the brand that you use or the binning or anything. It has to do with how many you use. So if you use more of a less efficient LED than the top bin Samsung, for example, you can get the same or better efficiency than Samsung. So there's nothing special about Samsung LEDs. They're a good brand, and they produce some of the highest efficiency LEDs, which is great, and they're market leaders in that sense. But they're not the be all and end all by any means. No.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Shane, I've got 3 questions I'd like to ask you, please.
Okay.
The first one is in regard to plasma grow light technology. I've seen your video on the Ceravision 420.
Yeah.
So I'd like to know if you've explored plasma grow light technology broader than that, and if there's a future in it. Secondly, I'd like to ask for your opinion on the Pulse Pro grow room monitor, which has a light sensor. Have you
which one? Sorry.
The Pulse Pro monitor.
Oh yes.
Built-in light sensor.
Yeah.
Have you looked into that? And the third question would be regarding your work on the PPFD app and at what stage that's at.
Yeah. So plasma is basically putting electrical power into a gas and exciting it. So getting it to a point, it's bordering on burning something, it's you're basically putting a lot of energy into elements for them to get excited and to generate photons, to emit photons. The Ceravision is a very focused machine where they have these little glass cartridges within them, which have a mixture of mercury and which generates the plasma, and then some other elements which broaden out the spectrum. And they are very expensive. They produce, they have filters and screens and stuff for narrowing the particular wavelengths of UVB that you're putting onto the grow area. but I don't think they're a particularly practical solution, to be honest. They are useful in greenhouses because you can get quite a lot of energy out of a single unit, which has a small physical size, a relatively small physical size. But if you want to generate UVB in a cost-effective way, just use fluorescence. It's the best technology out there. It's old and it's simple, but they work.
Have you heard of the sun on demand plasma bulb?
I haven't, no.
No. Okay, well, it's a plasma grow light that retails for about 6,000 US.
Yeah.
Which is ridiculous, but
well, I'd save your money on that one.
yeah, well, you know, if it survives another 10 years, the price will come down like everything else. Right?
It will. I don't know about that because, you know, putting elements into a glass tube and whacking a load of electricity in them, I don't know if that's going to get any cheaper over time. It's you know, they kind of perfected that with ceramic metal halide and LEP and all these other technologies, but they're all the variants of the same technology, which is blasting as I said, blasting a tube with a lot of electricity. So maybe they will get cheaper, but I again, if I refer back to the spectrum discussion, you know, we want to grow more, we just need more LEDs. We want to grow higher quality. There's lots of ways to achieve that. Light spectrum, I don't think is going to, using variables in the light spectrum, I don't think is going to unearth many improvements there, as far as I can see, other than, as I said, these marginal effects like using some UVB. You know, the UVB would increase terpenes and flavonoids by maybe about 20%, which is significant, but it's not life-changing. You know, it's not really, it's marginal improvements. Your second question, Ken, was about what's the
Pulse Pro, the light sensor on the Pulse Pro monitor.
Yeah, there's one of my colleagues has been trialing that equipment for them for about 2 years now. He's one of their testers basically, and he got their upgraded package there recently to test. I haven't seen the light sensor. But quantum sensors are about a minimum of about $300, and for a reason, because they're a very sophisticated device. Variants on, and we're going to get to this later, variants on a lux meter or lux sensor are quite cheap and easy to make, and they're reasonably accurate. So it's probably a variant of a lux meter or lux sensor. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not a power meter. It's not a quantum sensor, as far as I'm aware. You know, if you want to determine accurately how much power is in your tent, you need to get a quantum sensor, and you need to spend $300 to $400 on it. And there's no shortcut really around that. But going onto the app development and working with PPFD app. I was working with him for a while. We were looking to generate, to design and develop a product, which was basically a mid-level, so somewhere between a lux meter and a quantum sensor, where we'd be calibrating a lux meter for modern LED setups. So, for example, if you had a white with, you know, little red LEDs in it, you could use a lux meter with our modifications to read power more accurately than it can be done today, and using that through an app and all that sort of stuff. We were working on it over the summer. I got overrun, to be honest, with projects and new products and all sorts of stuff, and I've dropped it for the moment. I'm hoping to go back to it early next year. But the guy who's working on that from the app point of view is still plugging away at it, I believe.
Okay, great.
Photon app?
Jason.
Yeah, is that the Photon or Corona app you're talking about?
Yeah, so there's two apps. So there's one that's used on iPhones, and iPhones all have the same base front sensor technology, which means that you can calibrate the app with the iPhones consistently. However, Android phones use lots of different type of sensors with lots of different processing in between the sensor and the readout on the phone. So it's much more difficult to calibrate using a Android. I did one with using 3 different Android phones, and they all came up with different results for the same setup. So the Photon one, I believe, isn't that changed name now?
It was
No,
Corona.
It was Corona, now Photon.
It's
Yeah.
Photon now. Yeah.
Yeah. So that one, as far as I could determine, the spectrum that I tested under was quite accurate and consistent, and it didn't matter which version of iPhone you were using. So that one I found was very useful and reasonably accurate. But what's most important with this is relative numbers. So, if you're using it, the most useful feature of using a sensor like that is not the absolute number it's coming up with, but the relative number around your grow area. And going through the exercise of measuring in a grid around your grow area and seeing what the relative difference in light intensity is around there is the most useful thing. Because if you do that in a consistent way, you can, for example, you can raise and lower your light to different heights. You can look at the spread of light, but also calculate the total amount of light that's reaching your plant canopy. So you can see those 2 important measurements by going through that process. You may not have the right absolute number in terms at the end, but you'll have useful data to optimize your setup from doing.
Shane, guys, thank you so much. I appreciate this. I mean, I always love getting on these calls and really just exhausting all the information till we get to points where we say we don't know, or I need to go to use the restroom. Guys, thank you so much once again. Shane, thank you for coming on the channel. I look forward to doing more stuff with you. And remember to please like, share, and subscribe. Have a great grow, everyone.
Basically, in my practices and my observations as a whole, so not just with our medical plants, but with house plants, gardening, and stuff like that, I noticed that there's different absorption rates depending on your media. And while most will say, well, that's pretty obvious,